I'm so excited to be here with you.
We're live. Yes. Awesome.
Oh, it's been way too darn long.
I know. But I mean, it actually, it's why we're talking about what we're talking about today,
Yeah.
because I mean, this is the thing that happens, right? You're trying to run a
Yes.
business, you're trying to put books out, and then life happens.
Yes.
And, one of the things that we're going to talk about today about being flexible and things you need to bring, skills you need to bring to your author life.
Yeah.
And I see authors are like, I have a deadline, or I said I was going to do this, or, especially if it's just
Yep.
personally set. And then it's just like, I like to say authors are like quick setting cement. You get an idea in your head and you're stuck there. And when you
Yeah.
realize, well, maybe you just need to take a step back. So we got a lot of that to talk about today.
I'm giggling because of the analogy you just said. So I was out of town this last weekend, leading a women's retreat. And without giving any of the juicy details away of what happens, I do play around with a little bit of mortar while we're there. And I had run out of my plastic or my latex free gloves. So I did it with no gloves on.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wearing my engagement ring and wedding band. And I get in the car to go home, and the mortar was setting in in my rings.
Oh,
And so what you're just saying is really interesting, because I looked at it. I'm like, this is not good. And so I thought, well, there's a couple things I could do. I could just accept the fact that my beautiful ring now has different shine or not because of the mortar that is sitting in it. Or time is of the essence, and I can't let it sit for too long, because if it sits too long, then it will become near impossible to get out. And
no.
so that day I went to the ring place that we bought our ring from and got it. And that's why I call myself a single lady right now, because I have no jewelry. They're setting it. But that's really relevant, like what you
Yeah,
just said, to
true.
authorship and running an entrepreneur business and everything in between. Jen and I have not, it's been about a month and a half since, or give or take, since we've actually been able to connect. In doing a Beyond the Page live stream, we've had the holidays, which has been a fun journey. And then the new year, and last week and the week after and the week before, Jen's like, "Hey, Steph, you want to top in?" I'm like, I need another week. I need another week. And a lot of it has to do with life and
Yeah.
movement and change and unpredictability. Oh, Zan, welcome back. Thank you, friend. We're glad to be back. We are glad to be back. And when we were talking, Jen and I were discussing what should be our focus for this month. It came to me very quickly that there are some things as authors that, and just as people in general, just as business owners in general, that if we can learn and embrace and understand, maybe we will be less like the cement that dries and more like me going, "Hey, I don't want it to ruin my wedding rings. I might as well go to the shop and get it cleaned,"
Right.
and find a way to navigate through it.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, one thing I had to get over last year was that
Mm.
I did not release a book last year. And I haven't done
Mm.
that since 2016. And
Mm.
so, I decided not to feel bad about that. And
Good
as much,
things not feel bad about.
yeah, because I mean, there was a lot going on. My dad was really sick and then he died. And then I had to deal with his estate and deal with my moving my mom. It's just a lot, right? It was a lot.
Yeah.
And there's just the also emotional part of that, which I talk to a lot of authors about, is that when your limbic system is active, when you're stressed, it's like a light switch with your creativity, right? You can't turn that on. You can't force it. If you
Yeah.
do force it, you're going to be really unhappy with the product.
Yeah.
And I was working with another author who was trying to do that. She was trying to force it. And you could tell, I'm like, you're
Mm.
going to ruin your career because people will read this book and they will hate it. And I
Yep.
don't care that you think you have a deadline. It's a self-imposed deadline. And you
Yes.
need to just let it go, give
Yeah.
yourself a break, come back to it when you can because you're trying to
Right.
force something.
Yes.
And forcing something just it rarely works. I started writing again intermittently in November,
Mhm.
and I'm now back into my regular writing routine. But I'm only working on a novella, which does have a deadline because it's part of a big group project. So.
Yeah, but you mentioned something, and I think it's accurate when it comes to our author world. Is many of our deadlines are self-imposed, and we go, oh well, I wanted to do this year because, and we've created a reason. But there's nothing that writer's block likes more than throwing in a self-imposed deadline and then let life happen. And then if you don't give yourself grace in the process, then the block gets bigger. I know. I mean, Jen, since we last spoke, my family lost my oldest cat. Some of you all may have seen it on our live stream, baby. Oh my gosh, talk about hardship. Um, we had some major family struggles that we're working through. Our family got lice on Christmas Day. We had the flu. My daughter just got braces and an expander in her mouth that's breaking her jaw. And yeah, I think I may have had COVID in there too. So there's just like a thousand things. And it's like every day I'm like, oh my gosh, because I too had a plan for a new book that was supposed to come out last year.
Right.
But interestingly enough, and as Jen is my editor, I haven't given you this update, so we'll talk to you more about it offline. But sometimes, not sometimes, many times, a pause is not a bad thing. A
Right.
pause is a good thing, and it can open our thoughts and our creativity to something different. And I think it just goes back to this process of I'm really good at giving other people grace. I'm really bad at giving myself it.
Oh, 100%. It's really true. And I think a lot of times we need to step back and look at, kind of gain some perspective, because we tend to get really narrow focused on, well, this is what I was going to do. And this is, and that can be very helpful in certain situations, but sometimes you need to take a step back and say, is this really the best option here? And I do think, I've talked about the compost pile, right? That as you have ideas and things and you let them percolate, then it becomes this really lovely thing that makes things grow. And I do think that is what I experience it all the time, but this past year, it's been very helpful to know that, look, my creativity is still working in the background. This isn't nothing.
Right.
Thinking and waiting and taking some space isn't nothing. Sometimes it's what your creativity needs to add to the mix. And we have such a I think Becca Symes calls it like this production complex, where we just have to get more and more and more and more out, faster and faster, faster. And you end up on this hamster wheel. And I see a lot of authors burning out and just quitting completely because they've gotten on this hamster wheel. And I think sometimes taking that step off and saying, sometimes the creative process just needs a break, and it needs time, and you'll produce something better when you give it that break and allow it to kind of compost itself. And compost, you can't rush compost, right? I mean,
you can't. You can't. Going back to the retreat that I was just leading, it's funny you mentioned compost. We were talking about a bit of that as a gardener, Jen. That doesn't surprise you. And one of the ladies made a revelation, an insight I thought is interesting. Not to get too in the weeds, but let's go into the muck a bit. In this time of the year, if I want my garden to grow, I have to cover it with manure, with the gross waste of another animal, the stuff that didn't work for their body. It's leftover. It's gross. It's a bad word with a capital S, right? It is not good. But if we pivot and stop seeing it as shit and start seeing it as manure, then we can pivot it as not a waste, but fodder for growth. And same thing in our situations. Like sometimes you have to press pause. You have to give yourself that grace. You have to be flexible and learn from that, because this is manure for the next season. In December, Jen, I usually spend the month I take off from client work and everything, and I plan for the year. And this past December, I couldn't. I mean, just lice. If we only had lice, Jen, that would be enough that we couldn't have done it. That was pretty awful. But I came into January going, oh my gosh, I hadn't had time to sit down and reflect on everything. Oh my gosh. And again, I'm not giving myself the grace I needed. And then I was hit with a ton of bricks, and I'm still noodling on it with this question. And I think it's a good question to come back to when we feel like there's too many moving pieces. I started to ask myself, what matters? That was it. I started with what matters. I did that personally. I did that in business. I did that in my book world and authorship. Like, what really matters? Is it that we produce a book a year? Maybe, but probably not.
Sometimes. Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Right? Like,
Yeah.
is it that business grows? Maybe, but maybe not. Right? What really matters? And I think if we can put our life and our business and our authorship through that like litmus test, the outcome may surprise us.
Yeah, I think that's really true. I think focusing, I always ask the first thing I tell my authors to think about is the why. Why are you writing this book? And I think that is a great question to always be asking, not just on a book or an individual project, but why are you doing this whole crazy author business anyways, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of downside to it.
But it's not the easy business out there.
It's
Let's
not
just
an
be real.
easy way. I mean, based on your per hour rate of return, you make more money working out here at fast food because they pay
Yeah, absolutely.
$20 hour minimum wage in California for fast
Insane.
food workers.
It's insane.
But I don't know that most authors actually, if you were to calculate how much time it takes you to write a book, most authors probably don't make that. So a lot of times it's a labor of love. There's a message that you want to get out. There's something that's really, really important to you.
Yeah.
Sometimes the book is a byproduct of other things that you're doing in your business. There's a lot of reasons to write a book, and money is for most people probably pretty low on the list of
Sure.
things.
Yeah.
So it's important to look at the why, right? Because if you were just to look at it on a monetary basis, I wouldn't advise anybody to write a book and try to make
Right.
this is definitely not the fastest or easiest way to do it. And there's so much, luck and other things involved that are outside of your control. So, I
Fair.
mean, even big publishing houses lose money on 9 out of 10 books.
Yeah.
They just don't know which one is going to be the big hit. And
Yeah.
so, why are you doing it? Going back to that why will keep
Mhm.
you kind of, it's kind of like that anchor in the storm of craziness, keeps you from
Yeah.
getting too far off track. And
Yeah.
sometimes it is a matter of, well, we need to ride out the storm for a little bit and then get back to it.
It is a total coincidence and then also not coincidence that the first book I finished this year is Simon Sinek's Start with Why.
Ah,
I got my audiobook subscription with the library up and running, and it was a book people have been telling me to read, and I've always been like, I'll do it one day. And I just finished it. Really good, by the way, and a good reminder of the power of why and going back to it. But as you look at what you want to do this year, or you look at any project you're doing, I think, Jen, it's a good opportunity as a reminder to go back to, why are we doing it in the first place? Do you know why? If you don't know why, that might be a struggle. And as you're navigating change and hardship and flexibility and needing grace, why is important in the process too, right? Like, yesterday I expected to come back to work. I was really excited. When you like working, Jen, it's hard when you can't. And then my daughter had a 103 fever. I was like, oh, no, that's not fair. And then I had a moment of, well, what matters, Stephanie? Why, like, what's your why? And I'm like, all right, I love to work, but kind of, I think I really for sure love my kids more. And so I think being a mom today is really a requirement. And I love that. And I'm grateful for it. The book stuff will wait. There's a team that can keep things moving. I mean, it's just kind of how life is. But I have a couple of tips, and I'm going to just throw out a couple things, Jen, some of which we've talked about it, but as you're navigating hardship, one that comes to my mind is making sure that you actually are accepting that you're not perfect and accepting imperfections, right? Like, life will happen.
Yes.
So that's imperfect. But like, your writing isn't perfect either. And that's a hard thing to accept as well. I bet for you as an editor, that's probably something that you are encouraging people all the time.
Well, it's an art, right? There's science to it, but there's some basic principles. There's principles of storytelling. There's principles of editing for clear communication. But it is an art, and there are multiple ways to accomplish the same thing. And I think, yes, giving yourself some forgiveness, grace, letting things go. I find all of us, the book in our head is never the one that ends up on the page, right? And so you're the only one who knows about the book in your head. And so the distance between those two can feel really unsatisfying if you just focus on that. But nobody knows about the book in your head. And obviously, if you could have executed that book, you would have, right?
Right.
So, I feel that with every book. I mean, where I start and where I think it's going to go and where it ends up is totally different things. And that's just part of the journey that you have to embrace.
Mhm.
I also think it's great at the beginning of the year, any time, when you look at your whole life and ask, why am I doing all of the different things that you're doing, not just book writing, but why I'm involved with this group, or why am I still friends with that person, or why am I on social media this much, or whatever, right? To kind of analyze everything that you're doing and why. And it's okay if you want something, choose it. Like, I'm
Mhm.
specifically choosing this because I've chosen it,
Yes.
versus sometimes we just fall into things and we
Yeah.
get sucked into things. Someone asked us to be on this committee, and here 5 years later, we're still on it. And we don't even like it, you know? And so it's that why question is so good at everything in our lives. A good time to take good stock of everything. And sometimes it takes a crisis, or it takes things imploding, where you're like, I cannot do all of this. I have to get rid of some stuff. And I have really ruthlessly cut my life down to sort of the bare minimum.
Mhm.
And that includes, you know, stop trying to be friends with people who don't want to be friends with you.
I know.
Or whatever, right? Stop being on that committee that every time you go, you just feel, like nobody's listening to you. So why are you going?
Yeah. Well,
Or
we just like to fill space. I think our culture does.
yeah.
It's funny you're saying that, because something that was put on my heart, I don't know if I told you this yet, Jen, probably the end of December, when the world was going crazy in my space, was this phrase, more isn't always more. Sometimes more is just more.
Yes. Right? That's so true. Sometimes
Mhm.
you can just be wall to wall on your calendar with stuff that really does not tie back to your why.
Yeah.
And I love the idea. Don Miller talks about this a lot. Michael Hyatt talks about this a lot, of like a life mission statement. Like, why
Mhm.
are you here? What are the things you want to do in your life? Like, what do you feel like your mission statement is? And that is a great guiding principle for why
Mhm.
are you doing the things you're doing? And perhaps you don't need to be doing some of these other things if they don't tie into things you're super passionate about, that are really important to you. And it's a great time to kind of prune all of that. Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
I like what Zan is saying in the
Too.
comments.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's why
Too
she left the
short,
writing group.
right? It's too short
Yes.
to be with people you don't really want to be with.
Yeah, living up to somebody's expectation does you no good,
Right.
right? If you aren't getting joy, is that me? Good night. Ah, I have to get all my systems back in check. So I don't know if you can hear that, right? Where it's like, why is my phone go? Anyways, yeah, but Zan, I think you're right. And this is the time of the year that I sit back and evaluate all that stuff too.
Mhm.
Like, I go, all right, well, if I understand why I'm doing something, that lets me know. That actually it's a good business strategy when you're doing planning. It's like, why do you want to do it? And then, so instead of looking at the tactics, you're looking at the strategy and then integrating the tactics. So it's not like I'm going to post on social every day just because the rest of the world tells me to.
Yeah.
It's
Mhm.
I know I need to do this, and I know social media could or could not help me. And now it's a part of my why. And that is, a greater, there's greater value into that. And I think when it comes to, well, I'll use me as an example. I mean, we talk about social. I'm usually pretty visible on social, and I've been quiet, Jen.
Mhm.
Not intentionally, but because when I've sat down and looked the last few weeks of life, I've not been able to, and it's been okay,
Yeah.
right? Like, it's been okay. My life kept going. I focused on the things that mattered most. I've been trying to give myself grace in my authorship in life, but it allows us to go to take away what is just more for more sake.
Right.
And
I
it's
think that's true. And
adjust.
social media is a great example of that. It's very easy to get sucked in,
Yeah.
because it's an open system. There's no end to it, and you can, the way the algorithms run. Most people probably won't necessarily notice if you're not there.
Yeah,
And
I
just
know.
because, I mean, we tend to think, oh, people will notice, but they don't. And I know, I find for me that it's the last priority. It's the lowest priority, just for a lot of reasons. But it's a low rate of return on the energy and the effort. And so, um,
Mhm.
you know, you've got, if you have a limited amount of time, you have to really think about, where do I want to spend my time and my energy? John Acuff was talking about this. He said on his, you know, you get the screen time report, right? And he's like, I was on Instagram last week for whatever it was, like 12 hours or something, right? And he said, which, you know, if you think about it, it's 2 hours a day or something, you know, less than 2 hours a day. Probably, I think average for most people is probably that or more. But he says, you know, if I get paid $100 an hour, that was $1,200. Instagram did not pay me. Right?
And garbage.
And
That's
I think,
scary.
yeah, isn't that a great way though to evaluate whatever you're doing with your time? Not that everything has to be a monetary thing. Plenty of things don't have a monetary reward. But you think, if you start thinking about like some of these things that you're thinking of cutting from your life, or you're trying to evaluate if you should keep them or not, you know, it's sometimes putting a monetary value on it can help you go, well, how much would I need someone to pay me to continue to do this? What is that worth? What does it cost? Because there's always an opportunity cost.
Always a
You do
cost.
one thing, if you say yes to one thing, you're saying no to something else. And so you have to weigh that. And that can be, it's hard. It's hard to weigh that, especially when there's like family pressure or social pressure or whatever to do X, Y, and Z. And so doing all of that, kind of finding different ways, filters or whatever to weigh what you're doing can really be a good way to try and decide, is this really important to me? Is this something I really need to be spending my time doing? Because you really cannot get your time back. You can make more money, but you cannot get your time back. And that is, you know, I think everybody's feeling it. Like we had this weird, like the COVID time where time was weird and we just didn't know.
Super weird.
Can you believe like it's been 4 years now since came up? Like, isn't that crazy to believe? Because it feels like after like post COVID, everything just like time is just accelerated. And I thought it was just me because I'm getting, I mean, I guess we're all getting older, but I thought it was just me. But everybody I talk to is like, oh my gosh, like, aren't we supposed to be in October? And here we are, January, you know? And I felt myself saying that like with every month, like, how did we get here? And when you start feeling like time is just accelerating, you don't want to waste it, you know? And you want to choose how you're going to spend it with the things that really, really matter. And, you know, you get that saying, life is too short. And it's true. Life is too short to spend on things that really don't tie into what you want to do with your life, what is important to you. And we always say leaving a book is a wonderful legacy to leave. It's very, you know, there's just things that don't compare because your book is, the copyright on your book is your life plus 70 years. And you and I both lost grandparents. And how wonderful would you love to have something written by them? You know, I have some of my grandma's letters that she wrote to me, but, you know, she always said she was going to write her memoirs and she never did. And that really, you know, like she did some really cool things. She was a Rosie the Riveter. She worked in an aircraft factory during World War II. Like she lived in a military seaport. Like it would have been really cool to know some of those stories. And we have some of them just orally passed down, but you know, so you think about those kinds of things and you start thinking about, well, what do you want to pass on to future generations? Even if it's just, even if it's fiction, a story, but it's something you created, right? I mean, if it's a painting, like I would have loved to have, you know, a painting or like quilts, or we hang on to those things because someone made them and made them and has a lot of meaning to that. And so how much more important it is to spend time that way than on, you know, cat videos. Which
I know, right? I was thinking, I like cat videos, so listen, but yeah, I was sitting there thinking the other day, I was looking at some of my plants and I was like, oh, to be able to like just have the time to like really care and like pause. And then I was like, wait, the one thing that is the equalizer amongst all of us is we have the same amount of time.
Right.
And yes, circumstances happen. This is why flexibility and grace and self-care and adaptability and all of that stuff matters. But at the end of the day, we are responsible for how we're going to use our time. And what does that mean? And how does that guide what we do? And And if writing a book is important to us, then we have to schedule that time or prioritize the time to do it. If it's not, or if we don't have the capacity, that is okay. Like deep breaths, it's okay. But be aware that we are trading, things. That is that opportunity cost. And so I guess as you think about this forthcoming year, and you think about maybe you're like me, where you're like 2.5 weeks in and you're like, oh my gosh, like it just started and I just like can't pause time. And I feel like I've given everybody grace. Maybe you just need the reminder that you can always start from right now. Like
Right.
you can always move from right this second. That's the optimist in me. The realist in me says it's okay to do that too, because you're going to have hiccups or hardships or challenges no matter where you are. Your publisher is going to be running late. Your editor is going to want to do another round. The cover designer that you wanted to use is booked now. Your marketing work didn't work how you want it. Right. There's always going to be something
Yeah.
that could impact you. And I think one of the best skills as an author to have is the ability to be adaptable, to give themselves grace in the process, to trust the larger process, Jen, right? And
Absolutely.
have the bigger why in place.
Yeah, I agree. 100%. Think about, that's why that bigger why is just such an important thing to think about, why are you, because it does help. It's a standard to measure things against. And it does allow you to take a deep breath, and it does allow you to get some perspective and say, okay, well, that's fine. There's a delay. It doesn't change the big why.
It doesn't change the big why. Well, this was a fun one, a fun beyond the page to get back to, and selfishly helped me out. And, I'm excited for us to dig into the rest of this month, some other kind of soft skills or important skills for authors to navigate. Of course, let us know if there's some that you've been observing or that have been important to you in your journey. That would be, extremely helpful to share, because this is a field where we can feel in a silo, alone many times,
Very
and
much.
forget to know that some of these things are very real in the writer world. Jen, any last minute thoughts before we peace out until next week?
Just give yourself some grace, build in a little bit of margin in your life. I know when things are crazy, you feel like you can't, but there's something really nice. I like to take a cup of tea into my front library room, we call it, because it's got all the books in it. And it's just quiet. There's not a TV in there. It's got windows all around, and it's just peaceful. And
Yes.
sometimes just 5 minutes, 10 minutes, just creating that space to just breathe. Boy, that can make all the difference in your day. And so find those little pockets of time and use them to get yourself some space.
Adjust the pace so you have room for grace. That was put on my heart just now, but it's true. There's no rat race here. There's no running.
Yeah.
Self-imposed deadlines most of the time. But adjust that pace. All right. Well, Jen, do you have our how we close it? Do you still have it ready?
A little rusty. Well, we'll go for it.
We got it.
Authors, your words have power, your message has power, and you have power, no matter how long it takes you to get there. So we invite you each week to join us as we come here to go to the page and beyond as we talk all things books and marketing. Have a great week. We'll see you next week.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
guys.